Well, let's just start with this. We'll get to impeachment. They're having a very difficult time with this. And, I've read online where people sort of poo-poo impeachment. I think my sense of the value of impeachment is, I think hopefully people have a sense of by now. But from my perspective, one, it puts the Trump administration on the defensive. Politically, it puts them on the defensive. That's not a place where they don't particularly feel comfortable. Being a conservative means that you are oppressed. However, I'm talking literally on a material basis. They are under siege, and they don't have time or the oxygen now to build what they were planning to build. I mean, I think this was something I was saying over and over again about. No one was talking about the cost of creating a vacuum between a couple of months ago and the election. And my conjecture was that vacuum was going to be taken up with Bill Barr investigating the investigators and creating a whole new narrative, which I think it's quite clear they were actively pursuing during the summer, looking for this whole story that they could roll out that was both backward-looking and forward-looking. That project, it may work on the right now, but anything would work on the right. It has less ability to cross into even mainstream news, I think, although one can never underestimate that. I think there's value there. I don't know that it creates any more motivation to vote against Trump, but I think it does address a potential source of depression of the Democratic vote. If the Democrats had not done this, I think it would have hurt their voter turnout in some areas. Then I would also argue that the most important element of impeachment is going to be the Senate. If the Democrats take the Senate, and that's a big if, but if they take the Senate, it is going to be, I think, a function of impeachment. Regardless of which way these 5 or 6 or 7 senators vote, we've said them, their names ad nauseum. Regardless of which way they vote, it's going to be problematic. Even if they wait till after a primary to hold this vote in the Senate, if any of these people defect from Donald Trump is going to come at them just because of his ego. And so it's going to be a problem for all of them. So this is going to have, I think, a lot of import in the context of whether Democrats take the Senate. And then we'll talk about how special that will be when we get to Nancy Pelosi's proclamations. But with all that said,
Pelosi's part of the cinema wing of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. But with all that said, the right is really freaking out about impeachment in some ways, and they are desperately trying to figure out how to deal with this. Kevin McCarthy is still talking about the lack of transparency in the deposition process. I don't know how
Actually, okay, good. I'm glad, because I've literally not known what that means.
What?
Like, what transparency does he want here?
Well, that's the point. It's silly. There is no transparency.
Okay, no, I'm
during
relieved,
the deposition process.
Sometimes when I'm not like, I follow that story obviously, but occasionally I'll still be naive enough when they say something like that. I'm like, is there like a major trend line that I haven't heard here? Did Adam Schiff say that all of these hearings are going to be held in like the in like a insulated like telephone booth, like some old spy
this is all
movie or
backward
something?
looking. They're going to be, believe me, they're going to, the amount of publicity, talk about watch out what you wish for.
Right.
The amount of publicity these guys are going to give is going to be enormous. There's going to be so much transparency in this process. This is going to be, if the Democrats do it properly, this is going to have like the same transparency as like a blockbuster movie media blitz rollout. This is going to be like Ed Norton on podcasts, apparently. I saw like the
appreciate the
WTF.
current day reference there.
Well,
Sam.
I just
Well
know
done.
that because I saw
Ed Norton's
Brendan
everywhere.
McDonald complaining about how many times Ed
No
Norton
one cares
did all these
about your
podcasts on his rollout of his film. All right, but all that aside,
Going to be exactly like that.
we have on one hand, Kevin McCarthy's going out there complaining about the lack of transparency with the depositions, but the real yeoman's work is going to be done by those right-wing talkers who they're going to prove that all of this is just a nothing burger. This is a nothing burger. And in fact, back in September 24th, Ben Shapiro made this proclamation. Here's the short story. No quid pro quo. No impeachment, he wrote on Twitter. Bad, ugly behavior is not impeachable. Neither is suspicious timing. If it were, Biden would have been in serious trouble in 2016. Let's get the impeachment standard up front. No moving the goalposts, ladies and gentlemen. No moving the goalposts. Good for the Senate for demanding all the documents. Now, let the information flow freely. Let it all out. Release the papers. No quid pro quo, no impeachment. That was September 24th. Remember these words, ladies and gentlemen. No moving the goalpost. Goalpost, 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 goalpost.
But the headline, of course, is that the headline from Politico is that this particular official, Morrison, confirmed key testimony linking Trump to quid pro quo. Listen, we know what happened here. The White House should stop saying there was no quid pro quo. There was a quid pro quo. The question is whether it was a corrupt quid pro quo, as I've been saying for weeks. Quid pro quos in foreign policy happen all the time. You know what's a quid pro quo? Joe Biden saying explicitly he was going to link foreign aid to Ukraine to them cleaning up their act on corruption. That's a quid pro quo. Is it an inappropriate quid pro quo? Probably not. The question is whether this is a violation of law in terms of being bribery or attempt to influence the election from outside or anything like that. Now, as I say, Republicans are increasingly suspicious about all of this, mainly because Democrats continue to make Republicans suspicious about all of this. I'll explain in just 1 second. First, you're going to have to go over to dailywire.com and subscribe.
All right.
Nope.
Okay, so let's go over again. Here's a short story. No quid pro quo, no impeachment. Now, he was careful not to say, but if there is a quid pro quo, impeachment. No moving the goalposts, though, he wrote. Look, how do we know this quid pro quo is bribery or its cousin extortion? Because when Joe Biden very publicly, at the behest of our allies, and you could argue bad public policy or bad foreign policy, whatnot. I think, there's an argument to be made that whatever we should, whatever the argument, people can make arguments about that, but it was completely public. There was a large outcry about the corruptness of the prosecutor who was not going after corruption. Joe Biden went over there and said, you've got to investigate Burisma, the company that my son coincidentally works for, because the British need your cooperation for their investigation. And if you don't do this, we're not going to support you.
Dad, there's like $1 billion of the lie.
You want to get into NATO? We can't allow it if you don't cooperate with NATO people.
Yeah.
Now,
and I'll just say, I think to underline your point, because I am somebody very much of the school that a lot of this anti-corruption stuff, even when there's real corruption, is simply a kind of cynical tool of U.S. foreign policy. Totally my viewpoint. It doesn't undermine the broader point that's being made here about the different things being deployed.
Right. It may be bad foreign policy, but it is actually foreign policy. It is not foreign policy by any stretch of the imagination to say money that's already earmarked to you that I don't have official statutory control over will not be coming to you, even though it's been earmarked by Congress, unless you give me, not the country, not not any type of policy. Me, what I want. It could be a suitcase of money. In this instance, I want a little help with my political campaign. I want you to say that Joe Biden is corrupt. You don't even have to do the investigation.
I want the deliverable.
I want the deliverable. Now,
I don't care how you do it. It could take you 1 hour. It could take you 3 weeks. Just give
Maybe
me the
he
results.
just meant the deliverable for the American people.
if you concede, I should say, that is a quid pro quo, there's no way you can say this is not an illicit quid pro quo. Because if you can't say that, then it's impossible for a president to even accept a bribe or extort anybody. What could they possibly do? If everything the president does is in the interest of the United States, then what's an emolument? What's a bribe? Doesn't exist. If it helps me, you're helping America. I'm America.
I kind of feel like Trump would have done this just out in the open if it were totally up to him. Like, he doesn't care. He tried to have the G7 summit at his failing resort.
When he held up the money for Ukraine, he didn't say, I'm holding up the money for Ukraine, because he said, tell the Senate and anybody who asked that it's an agency issue. So he had the opportunity to go public about it, and he didn't. He didn't do it until he got caught. And then that was a tactic as a way of trying to make it like, nothing wrong with that, but that doesn't fly. So they've got real problems here. And it's going to become, I think, exceedingly clear as we start to see the rollout of the public argument for impeachment.
Ben Shapiro does win the world's laziest sophist award, though, once again.
Office? Is that what
Sophist.
Oh, sophist.
I think he just doesn't even remember what he says on a day-to-day basis.
No.
Yeah, I
Well,
guess
that's
that's
the
like
beauty.
sub-sophistry, really.
That's the beauty. As long as he's got a website where he says stupid things, he can put that on there and just like completely disavow it.
Yeah, that's not an exhaustive list.
But Ben Shapiro, look, he has my sympathies because he's doing his job and he doesn't have much to work with. He doesn't have much to work with. And I'm not just talking about
Cognitive limitations.
his
Sorry,
cognitive
Yarmulke
limitations
boy.
or his lack of, sort of charisma or anything like that.
No,
I'm
that's
talking
a
about
given.
content.
Well, there was like, oh man, I mean, there's been so many examples like this, but there was that one where they caught some backbench Republican coming out of some hearing, and they were like, and the guy clearly had internalized what the talking point was in the beginning of the day, and he was like, the president did not blah blah blah, and then of course like Trump had like 30 minutes ago been like, yeah, I did blah blah blah, and the point is that's great. And so they asked the guy like, well, he just said that he did blah blah blah, and he's like, I'm gonna have to leave now. It's too much for them.
Let's get into Medicare for